The CoCo Crew Podcast is hosted by Cyber Ears. If you are serious about your podcast hosting needs, you should check out Cyber Ears. Whether you are a podcaster, a radio host, a musician, a narrator, an audiobook author, or simply a school, church, corporation, or anyone else with an audio recording that needs to be hosted or distributed, you should check out cyberears.com. Unlimited bandwidth, fast, reliable, and rugged servers with no hidden fees. Cyber Ears. Your audio, your terms.
Action.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet? Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
You are listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast, a delicious adventure into the world of retro computing news and information featuring the Tandy Color Computer. Okay, welcome everyone to the episode 0 of the new CoCo Crew Podcast. This is our new podcast about retro computing in general, news and events centered around the Tandy Color Computer. We're hoping to make this a monthly podcast, targeting approximately 1 hour. So hopefully we can ride with you on your commutes back and forth, or on your back porch in the evenings, or whenever you listen to podcasts. We hope to cover a variety of topics related to the Tandy Color Computer. We're going to talk about CoCo Fest. We're going to talk about what's happening on the CoCo mailing list, or what's happening on the Facebook page. We hope to include information, possibly interviews about new or ongoing projects. We may have some reviews of existing CoCo games. We might even go through occasionally on some old CoCo magazines. Anyway, we're just a couple of guys who enjoy CoCo Fest and playing with our CoCos, and we hope that you'll enjoy listening to us talk. This is John Linville, and my co-host is Neil Blanchard. Neil, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's perfect. Looking forward to getting this started.
All right. We've been tossing this back and forth for a little while, including before CoCo Fest, and we shared the idea with a few of our friends at CoCo Fest who've encouraged us to continue and pursue the idea, and I think we're going to have some fun. I hope you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a great way to get information out, different projects and upcoming events.
Yep, definitely. I would like to use this as a way to coax as many souls as we can to CoCo Fest next year and bring people into the CoCo community, bring people on the mailing list, on the Facebook page. I'll even read your Twitter tweets if you'll send them to me.
Yes, new faces are always good.
Definitely. Neil himself was a new face at the CoCo Fest a couple of years ago, and we've really enjoyed having him and his contributions. And, every year now we get a couple of new people, and some stick around, some don't. But like I say, it's a fun hobby. It's a bit nostalgia, and it's a bit flexing your intelligence and muscles on solving problems and programming, a bit of doing things like restorations, from cleanups and soldering and repairs, and just all kinds of things there. But,
yeah, it's always a good time. The CoCo Fest, right. It's a good event, but definitely goes too quick.
That is definitely true. All right. Well, I think we're going to talk about CoCo Fest a little more in depth in a bit.
Hey, John and Neil, this is Boise Pete with Cloud9. I just wanted to say congratulations on starting the CoCo Podcast, something that we've been looking forward to in the community for a long time and something that's long overdue for the color computer. Oh, and by the way, have you got your CoCo 3 yet?
Maybe it's time for the hosts to introduce themselves a little more in depth.
All right.
So I'll start. I am John Linville. I have been reasonably active in the color computer community for a really long time. Of course, I had a CoCo as a kid, and then at some point I kind of discovered girls and laid the CoCo down while I played some football and did some other things. Went off to college, and got a degree in computer engineering at NC State, and not long after that, I kind of remembered playing a game from back in the day that turned out to be Robot Odyssey. And so I remember playing that on the color computer, so I went off and located color computer hardware to play that game on. This is around 1995. And became aware of the CoCo mailing list and what was happening there. And back then it was hosted on a site at Princeton. And, I just sort of went through a period of, collecting a few items and trying to learn as much information that I could about the CoCo at a technical level. Became nostalgic or maybe even excited to learn about OS 9 and what sort of things people were doing with the CoCo back in the day, and then even at that point, which now that's sort of back in the day 20 years ago. But still thought it was a little bit of a silly hobby for people. But I guess back in the late 90s, there was still, along with CoCo Fest, there was another similar event called Pen Fest that was organized in Pennsylvania. And after I'd gotten married around 2000, we were visiting my mother-in-law, who happened to live in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, which was the same town where PenFest was that year, and happened to be the same weekend we were there. And I went, and any excuse to get away from the in-laws, I guess. And I went and met Brother Jeremy and a few other notable people from the color computer community, and acquired a few items that were kind of hard to come by back then, unless you already knew somebody who had one. And so it was like a great flea market opportunity, and it just was a really exciting time. And so I thought to myself, well, they're not going to do these sorts of events forever. No. So I guess next year I'd better get to Chicago, because that was actually the last Pen Fest in 2000. I thought, well, next year I'd better get to Chicago and soak up as much enjoyment like this as I can from CoCo Fest while it lasts. And of course, that was 15 years ago now. And we're still having CoCo Fest, and still expect to see a few more. Anyway, that's kind of a long-winded introduction. Somewhere along the way, I got involved in writing some software for the CoCo, and pretty much for my own, just challenging myself, my own enjoyment. I did a video player for the CoCo 3 that lets you download videos like off of YouTube and transcode them to something that can be played on the CoCo. It's the beauty of it is sort of in the eye of the beholder. It's not something most normal people would want to sit and watch a movie on or whatever, but if you understand the amount of effort it takes for the CoCo to play a digital video, it's kind of impressive.
That was a neat project you had. I got to see that running a few times.
Yeah,
Very
so
impressive.
it's like I say, it's kind of cool. It's a technology demo. It's a little hard to make much out of it, but then that kind of developed some skills that led me to move on to writing a game for the CoCo 1 and 2 called Farfall. Probably if you're listening to this podcast, you've already heard of Farfall, and by the time you're done with this podcast, you might have heard so much about Farfall you never want to hear about it again.
I don't know. That's a good game.
Anyway, we've had a lot of fun with Farfall for several years now, going through some development iterations and figuring out how to make T-shirts for it, and figuring out how to make plastic cases and for cartridges and all sorts of different things. There's a lot of information available about Farfall out on the blog at farfall.blogspot.com. And we'll probably have that in the show notes, I guess. And anyway, I think that's more than enough introduction for me. So Neil, why don't you tell us more about who you are and how you became involved with the CoCo, what you're doing these days.
Yeah, that was a great introduction. Thank you. Yes, my name is Neil Blanchard, and I got involved with the CoCo. Actually, it was my first computer, and that's what got me into it. And that's going back to 88. Got my first CoCo 3. I was lucky I had a disk drive, so I didn't have to mess around with tape drives and that sort of thing. And I was fortunate because I was living in a bigger city at the time, and we had 2 color computer clubs. So I signed up for both of them. Learned a great deal of information from all the people at the different clubs. And unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but I sold the CoCo 3 when I joined into the PC world. Then I decided back in 2005 to get back into the CoCo 3, or just into the CoCo in general. So I hopped on the internet and looked at some different websites and different sources, and came across some different information, and got back into it. And attended my first color computer, the CoCo Fest in Chicago in, I believe it was 2010.
And so what was your hook for CoCo Fest? It's a long drive for you.
Yeah, it's about it's a 12-hour drive from Ontario, Canada. I'm right near Niagara Falls.
So what makes it worthwhile to come to CoCo Fest?
The people there, and the stuff you learn, get to see different projects.
Yeah. I think what's exciting, or for me to some degree nowadays at least, is that there's other people who are kind of the same kind of crazy.
Yeah. We're all crazy together.
Yeah. Well, so, since then you've definitely made friends with, of course, me and Boise and Mark and Jim, and just who I was particularly thinking of. You've worked on some projects with Jim.
Yes, I have. Yeah,
and
I just recently did a restoration project on a game he wrote called Plateau of the Past. And basically there was only about 1 copy left in existence. So I wanted to basically preserve that game. So I remade it, recopied the manuals, used thicker paper, used like a heavy cardstock, added some color, and duplicated the discs, including the labels.
Yep. And so you made a nice package available at the last CoCo Fest. So
trying to make it as authentic as it would have been, in the 80s when it was sold in 1986. So that's when it came out.
It even came in the Ziploc bag.
That's right. Hard to track them down now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was kind of a characteristic thing back in that time for third-party software publishing. Would come in his, the probably not brand name Ziploc, but that style of plastic bag.
That's right.
And usually be, if it was in a store, just be hanging on a hook somewhere in those bags, or it'd come that way in the mail.
That's how a lot of software was distributed back then.
Absolutely.
Hello, CoCo Crew. I'm excited about the new podcast. It makes information much more personal, and it's a great way to bring the various online communities together. I look forward to hearing discussions of new and ongoing CoCo projects, and we all look forward to hearing the voices behind the projects. I know you'll be covering both RS-DOS and Nitro S9, and there seems to be a growing interest in developing CoCo cartridges again. I hope you'll be covering that as well. Good luck to CoCo Crew. We support you. Long live CoCo.
All right. If you are going to be a member of the CoCo community these days, one of the most important mechanisms available for communicating with other CoCo folks, exchanging information, learning about the CoCo itself and what other sorts of events or happenings there are, is a mailing list. Now, just heard some of you out there groan a bit because we always hear a few folks, and I don't know if there's a generational thing or just, different people like different things about computers. There's always a few people who groan about the mailing list being some sort of archaic, ancient technology or whatever. I don't agree with you, but I'm not going to argue with you, certainly on our podcast. But either way, the mailing list exists, and it is fairly active, and it can be a great way to exchange information. And so I would love to have as many people join it as possible. And it seems to be pretty healthy as far as I can tell. So it's in no danger of going away anytime soon, as far as I know. The list is hosted by an old CoCo guy by the name of Dennis Bathory Kitts. I think that's how you pronounce it. If not, Dennis, please feel free to correct me. And it is at his site, which is called, it's called maltedmedia.com. And if you Google for CoCo and Malted Media, I'm pretty sure you can find the list URLs. I assume we're going to have some show notes, and we'll have the list URLs available there. It is hosted by, for those of you who care, it's hosted by a piece of software called Mailman, which is very common for mailing list management on the internet. And Mailman includes an archiver. So if you find the Mailman page for the CoCo mailing list, you can find archives that go back to 2003 when we switched over from the Princeton list to Dennis's list at Malted Media. And again, that's CoCo at maltedmedia.com.
And that is a good thing to point out as an advantage that's been brought up before. It's excellent for archiving. You could even do a simple Google search. Different keywords will bring up that list as well.
Yes, I think many Google inquiries related to the CoCo will end up with at least one link that points into the CoCo mailing list archives from the past 12 years. Like I said, that is probably the strongest argument in favor of a mailing list these days is the archiving. We actually just had a discussion like this on the Facebook group, which Neil's going to talk about more in a minute. The problem I have with Facebook and with a lot of people suggest from time to time that we should switch over to some other kind of forum-based medium, which is fine if you like, but I find that those kind of media are harder to search for things. If you don't see what's there now, it's a little hard to find what's been there before. But anyway, I like the mailing list. I hope you'll join it. I hope you'll enjoy it as well. Thought it might be worthwhile to go through the past month or two and just discuss some of the topics that have been discussed on the mailing list. So I'm looking at the archives now. There's I'm just trying to let's see. Here's there was a topic posted on, well, let's see, it's called A First of Its Kind, but it's a YouTube link. I thought it was a different, yeah, that one is about Louis Antoniosi's video converter that's CoCo 3 oriented. That is for connecting the RGB output of a CoCo 3 to a VGA monitor, and he does some emulation of the kind of CRT effects, so you get a more retro feel to that kind of output. Let's see, we have a month or so ago, we started talking about who's going to CoCo Fest, what people are going to do there. Here we go. We have another topic on the CPM emulator that's out there. Again, that's Louis Antoniosi as well, I believe, right?
He's working on that.
Yeah, where he is actually in OS 9. He has got an emulator that emulates the Z80 CPU for running Z80 binary code, and then whenever it makes an operating system call into CPM, he intercepts it and handles it through OS 9, and he can actually run like WordStar and stuff.
That's incredible.
In OS 9. It's pretty interesting stuff. Let's see.
That's all running on the 6809 processor.
Yeah, it all runs on the 6809. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Let's see. We get a lot of various short topics. People asking about DriveWire, and people asking about how to print from a CoCo. Let's see. I have a topic I started about what CoCo 3 games actually use 2 buttons on the joystick.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Which actually turned out to be quite a number. I just wasn't aware of them before.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, quite a few of the later games took advantage of that extra button.
So it's I wanted to know that so I could demo a 2-button joystick replacement or whatever that I had created. Or custom joystick. I wanted to. It has 2 buttons, so I wanted to show people that it actually works. Let's see. Well, I don't mean to hog things up, but I did post a preview video of my Follow CoCo game, which is basically a Simon clone. A few people asked questions about that. We got people asking about using X10 with the CoCo. There's a topic about Fusix, which Fusix is an interesting project that's out there from someone I know personally, actually from the Linux community, Alan Cox, and he's got a roughly Unix-like kernel that he is porting to a number of retro systems, or at least retro processors like Z80 or whatever, and he actually has it running on some retro systems, including the TRS-80 Model 4, and I think he's got it running on MSX, and he's actually done some work getting it booting on Dragon, which, of course, Dragon is basically a CoCo 2.
That's right.
Yeah. It's definitely an interesting project. I personally have not taken the time to get too deeply involved with it for a variety of reasons that are have nothing to do with the quality of the project. And like I said, Alan is someone I know personally who does excellent work in the Linux community, and to all accounts, he's doing excellent work with Fusix in the retro computing community as well. Gosh, there's so many topics on this mailing list. So definitely no reason to doubt the health of the mailing list. I had no idea there were so many, and these are just the ones for April.
There's no shortage, that's for sure.
Let's see. We got people talking about there's the external ROM for the character generator for the 6847 that Zipster's working on. There's some topic discussion there.
Yeah, that's an interesting project. I believe that'll add the lowercase character set as well.
That's right. And so I think it's essentially, I don't know if I have no idea the origin of the circuit he's using, so I don't want to say it's a clone of LowerKit, but it's definitely similar to the LowerKit hardware that was available sort of back in the day. Very interesting. My only regret is that he didn't make it where you could upload the new character bitmaps in software, because that could potentially make for some very interesting game development. Although there are limitations there, basically just 2 colors for your games. But, you could live with that. It still might be pretty interesting for some games, say Pac-Man, or maybe even a Mario Brothers style of game where you essentially do a tile-based graphics.
Oh, that sounds great.
Anyway, maybe he'll add that later. We had some discussion of what hashtags to use for tweeting about or at the CoCo Fest. I don't think we really settled anything.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do they have a Twitter account? Does the Glen site at CoCo Fest?
I actually don't know if they have one or not. Obviously I have one, and Boise and Mark have accounts. So we were tweeting a bit there. I think some individuals have Twitter accounts, but I don't know if Glenside does or not. They probably should.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Well, almost through April here. Let's see. Some talk about the CoCo STCs, a project I'm sure we'll discuss more about. Tom Seagrove, switching them to May now, or crossing over at least. Tom Seagrove, cooperation with Boise, I think, Boise Pete, has gotten some old public access television videos about how to use your color computer that were produced for some sort of public access television down in Louisiana back in the 80s from a friend of Boise's, and has gotten those videos moved over to where they are now available on YouTube. They're pretty cool videos. They're a little cheesy period pieces in some respect, but they're interesting to watch. So if you're a CoCo nut, maybe you should look for them and check them out. There's a little thread here this month about someone making it possible to run Farfall live in your browser on the Internet Archive. Well, that Farfall guy is a great guy. Let me tell you
I've
what.
heard of that guy before.
Hey, what's Farfall?
Only the hottest in the there right now.
It is a fun game. I do agree with that. But I kind of wrote it for myself. So we have a thread speculating on the health of a CoCo mailing list member from the past, known as Little John. I hope Little John's okay. If anyone does know definitively the status of Little John, please do let me know, or let us know, or let the list know. The speculation is not good. He was known to have some health problems, and then he just disappeared from the list.
Yeah, he hasn't been on in a while. Hopefully he's okay.
I do hope he is okay. Oh, my personal favorite thread from this list this month is the one about somebody came on the list new and said, hey, someone should write a version of Sudoku for the color computer. Maybe they could call it Cocodoku. It's actually, I just did that.
It's already been done.
Yeah. So even used the name Cocodoku. So I don't know if this is a case of great minds thinking alike, or if this fellow maybe saw my postings about Cocodoku and it just slipped his mind, and then came back to him later that it'd be a good idea to have that. Right. I don't know. Yeah. But it was kind of funny for me, at least.
Yeah.
Oh, and then the latest one, of course, was the thread about how our friend Jim O'Keefe from the CoCo Fest and author of Plateau of the Past also entered a local singing contest in the Chicago area known as Senior American Idol, I think is what it's called. And
that's right.
He came out the winner singing some American classics like Mac the Knife. And so we are, of course, very proud of Jim. Congratulations to him.
Yeah.
Oh, and of course, last minute here, the last thing on the mailing list archive I'm looking at right now is is Nick Morentis, who is a CoCo game developer from the past who has been active on the list for a number of years and had a bit of a dust up with some other list members earlier this year. And he took a break basically from posting on the list and also from posting to the blog he has about a game he's been writing called Popstar Pilot. He announced just today that he is back on the list and added a few entries to his blog. And so definitely welcome back, Nick. I'm so glad to hear that you've returned to our community, and I really look forward to seeing where you go with Popstar Pilot.
Yeah, that's great. I just saw that posting on the Facebook group as well.
It's a Radio Shack Merry Christmas.
This year, I needed to give a real family pleaser.
Honey, please help me with this budget.
How about a new game, Dad? Please.
And I found it. Radio Shack's Color Computer 2. On sale for just $99.95. It entertains, educates, manages. It's expandable and affordable. Now that really pleases me.
The Color Computer 2. Sale price for Christmas. Only at Radio Shack.
So with that, I think we're going to end on a high note on this perhaps a little bit boring overview of current list traffic. And since you just mentioned the Facebook group, I'm going to turn it over to you, to Neil, to discuss what the Facebook group is and what sort of things have been happening there.
Sounds good. Well, for people that prefer Facebook, or if they're on Facebook, I guess it's you can say the new school way. There's also a color computer group on there, very active. As of this podcast right now, there's 948 members in the group. And basically, there's all sorts of interesting threads that people post up every day. Anything from getting help to repair items, new projects, even old information, old magazine scans. Pretty much everything you could think of is on there. It's a great way to stay in touch as well. A little harder to find stuff, though. That's the basically, I guess, one of the annoyances with it that people are complaining about. That you can find it, but it's just harder to search, unlike the list that John was mentioning. What are your thoughts on that, John?
The Facebook group is definitely convenient and to use and to exchange a certain amount of information. I definitely use it for announcing things. When I'm working on a project and I want people to be aware of what I'm doing.
And I think the other advantage too with the Facebook is that you can post pictures. So you can have images of different projects. And
that is true. That's a lot easier than trying to send it to the mailing list. Just looking, since you mentioned the number of people on the Facebook group, on the mailing list, it says there's 359 non-digested members and 123 digested members. The list is not eating any members. The digested part refers to whether they receive individual emails or if they receive kind of one email with all the other emails from that day grouped together. So we're looking at about 480, give or take, about 480 members on the mailing list. So I think, would you say 800, 900 on the Facebook group?
Yeah, it shows 948 as of right now.
Okay, so numerically, the Facebook group has a broader audience. I have no idea how that translates between, serious interest or not. And I'm sure there's some overlap because I'm in both myself, and I assume you are as well. Facebook, like you say, it's available on your phone or whatever. It is kind of the way people do things nowadays. So it's definitely good that CoCo has a presence on the Facebook group. If I ever say anything that sounds derogatory about the Facebook group, it's really not intentional. It might be good-natured ribbing, but I definitely have no animosity towards the Facebook group. I personally prefer the email for most things, but it's definitely a handy resource to have the Facebook group.
Yes, I think they're both good in their own way.
So you want to talk about my thread there on the Facebook group recently?
Yeah, that thread was unbelievable. That John posted, was it about a week ago? He posted a thread on the Facebook group, who's my favorite programmer? That just spawned into at least, I would say, a whole week of different entries.
Right. Well, of course, the picture that there was taken from an interview of Steve Bjork from Color Computer Magazine, I think, back around '83, I believe. And that was actually his quote. Who's my favorite CoCo programmer? Me. Which, he's a young man full of himself. And,
right.
It's just kind of a silly thing for him to have said. But I posted it and just to be silly, I guess. But it happened to bring out a lot of commentary.
It did.
From a lot of people from the CoCo from back around 80 in the mid 80s or late 80s who
brought back some original developers and programmers back from back in the day.
Absolutely, and it was great to hear from some of those guys. Some of them did not have the most positive things to say about Steve's quote, but I don't think it got out of hand. I don't think it was too negative or anything. It was more cathartic, I think, for most people to at least be able to express feelings. Not my intention. I just wanted to have a little chuckle at Steve's comment, but it did spawn a very long thread with a lot of CoCo luminaries. Some people we really had not heard from at all in a while. So that was it was nice to see that.
It was, and the interesting thing about that thread is it was a standstill at the beginning, and then all of a sudden it just took off.
Yeah, it was fun. I don't know if you just heard any interruption here.
But no, sounded okay over here.
Okay, yeah. So it just had the wife pop her head in. So yeah, it was definitely fun to see that, and I guess that's the kind of thing that plays to the strengths of Facebook. You have a lot of people who had maybe an in-depth connection to the CoCo community a long time ago, and they're not really that connected right now, or maybe just people who just have just a slight interest. They'd like to hear about what's happening once in a while, but they don't necessarily want to read email about it every day. So it's definitely a good tool for people in those situations to still be available to us and to hear about what's going on. So
I think because it's, it's like you were saying, it's more accessible. If you have 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, you can pick up your phone, look at the postings, the different threads, and you can comment while you're on the go.
Yeah, definitely. So, all right. Well, so there's a couple of good ways. If you're new to the CoCo community, or maybe if you're not new, but just haven't spread your wings as much, maybe there's a couple of different ways now that you can look and reach out and hear more about what's going on with people in the CoCo community, get help with problems you might be having, tell us about projects you're doing. I'm sure we'd all love to hear from you.
That's great.
Now, if there is any dedicated group of old computer users, it is certainly the people who still love their CoCo, the Tandy color computer.
Okay, so one of the main reasons we wanted to have this podcast actually is to kind of spread the word and get more people interested in coming to an annual event that we have in what you might call meet space or real life, where we actually get real people to come to a location near Chicago and meet in person. This event is called CoCo Fest. Of course, it's Color Computer Festival or however you want to put it together. I'm sure you can understand what CoCo Fest means. And this is an event put on by the Glenside Color Computer Club, which, of course, back in the day was a regional color computer club in the Chicago area. And at this point is sort of the last survivor in terms of color computer clubs. And so they're now a national or probably international club with members all over the place.
And they still meet monthly.
And they do meet monthly. That's correct. And if you want to be part of their monthly calls or monthly meetings, you actually can join their meetings via Skype. In fact, I've done that maybe half a dozen times now. It can be a little frustrating. Skype does not always fulfill its full duties. but it is a workable situation. You can get in and hear about what's going on. Most of their planning is around each year's CoCo Fest. And so if you want to have a chance to express your opinion about what should happen with CoCo Fest or that sort of thing, then that's a way for you to get involved. Or if you just want to sit in and listen in to some chit chat, and they're not always the best at staying completely on topic, for better or for worse. It's one of those things. I love that about them, and sometimes it irritates me quite a bit.
If you're in the Chicago area, you can also join them as well.
You can. I forget exactly where it is because I've never been, but that is available on their website. And I believe, assuming we have show notes, we'll put a link to the Glenside website in the show notes, and you can find out for yourself if you would like to join their meetings in person. Anyway, so CoCo Fest grew out of Rainbow Fest, which were actual trade show style of meetings that happened back when the color computer was more of a actual commercial concern. And as the color computer was winding down in 90 or 91, something like that, they had kind of a last Rainbow Fest. As I understand it, the Rainbow quit sponsoring them, and I'm not sure of the exact year. So it's around 91, maybe it's 90, maybe it's later. But Rainbow quit sponsoring them, and so a number of the CoCo vendors decided they were going to have one last fest, and so it was sponsored by the vendors. And then
that's where it got its name, the Chicago last CoCo Fest.
That's right. And so that was the last CoCo Fest, and then Glenside got involved and said, well, let's have another one. And because they're kind of goofy guys with a quirky sense of humor, they decided to still call it the last CoCo Fest, because that's always been the joke, is they never really know if they're going to do another one. And so that event has it's changed a bit over the years. I don't really know how they were up until 2000 or so, but my interpretation was that for a while they were still sort of trade shows for the dwindling CoCo vendor community through the late 90s or mid 90s and the late 90s. By the time I started going around 2001, they were fantastic yard sales for getting CoCo stuff.
Lots of hardware and different items.
Of hardware. There was still new software that in those plastic bags that just had never been sold. There was stuff that was hard to find, like the MM1 computers, which we might talk about that in some future podcast.
I definitely missed out on that.
There was, like I say, stuff that was difficult to acquire, rare items, whatever. I picked up a few things back in the day, although at that point I was still flying to Chicago, so it was hard to take a lot of stuff home.
Yeah, got stuff in your carry-on.
But so, you get a small community together and you have an annual meeting. And so inevitably you end up with the people who become friends. And when your basis of your friendship is kind of a goofy hobby that not just everybody wants to do, it's pretty easy for it to kind of, become where the event itself is more about the friends than it is about the computer in some ways.
Right.
And so, it's, you go and there is a certain amount of reminiscing and talking about nostalgia and how it was back in the day or whatever. But, there's also talking about, new things to do with the CoCo, new projects, new ways to solve problems, like floppy drives are dying, if not already dead. So how do you load software on a CoCo that, especially when the software itself thinks it's coming off of a floppy drive, right? So how do you display video? That's a problem that is coming to a head in many ways, as even
it's harder to find the monitors, the original screens.
That's right. Well, even stuff that used to accept composite video, now what I hear is that a lot of newer stuff is not even accepting that signal.
That's right.
And so it's good to come together and solve some of these problems and whatever. And, this is one I kind of had a personal struggle on some of this. It's like, well, this is a really goofy hobby. And, I have a master's degree in computer engineering. I should be really interested in supercomputers or whatever. And of course, some of that stuff is interesting, but it seems a little goofy for me to feel like, in some ways, it's like I'm playing around in the sandbox. What are you doing with this old computer, right? But so I've tried to explain this to friends at different times. Like, well, if I was in my basement with a model train set, would that confuse you? Because to me, it's a lot like that, right? Or any number of other hobbies that don't really have any productive use. But anyway, the great thing about going to CoCo Fest is I don't have to explain that to any of those guys. They're all crazy too, right?
We're all the same.
And so anyway, CoCo Fest has evolved a bit over the years. You, Neil, have been coming about 5 years now. Is that right?
That's right.
So what kind of changes do you think you've seen in CoCo Fest over that time? I know one, as when you first came to CoCo Fest, there was a guy wearing a dress or a robe.
It was quite the shocking experience my first time at CoCo Fest. Brother Jeremy was there. I guess they call him the CoCo Monk. And also Steve Bjork was there. Those are two members that I haven't seen since my first time there back in 2010. And,
Steve, we do miss you. If you happen to listen to this podcast, we would love to see you again. And in fact, I understand that Brother Jeremy is planning to come next year to the CoCo Fest, so we will see him again. Or at least I certainly hope so.
And also, I know that when I first met Steve, he was mentioning about bringing Marty Goodman.
That would be fantastic.
I've definitely noticed more projects, more active members from, believe it or not, since 2010. Every year I go, it seems to get, there's new faces, new projects. It's just good to see.
Yeah, I've been very pleased the past couple of years, particularly this year, with the attendance and the new faces. Like I said, every time we get a new face, it strengthens our community. And some of those people, some people come and they just take a look around and, go about their business, and that's fine. But, some people come and say, hey, this is cool. I've been doing this neat project where I've, whatever. And maybe they built a weather station with their CoCo, or maybe they built a robot, or, maybe they wrote a game, or maybe they just taught their kid how to program, whatever. But it's just great to see that kind of interaction. Anyway, so before we go too long in this segment, maybe we'll start to wrap up a little bit. But we are expecting this coming year will be the 25th annual last Chicago CoCo Fest. Silver anniversary. I think that's kind of a big deal.
It is.
I would love to see a whole bunch of more new faces show up and fill the hall and tell us about their projects and buy some Farfall carts. Let's hope I have some.
We got to get making them.
Yeah. But so that's part of what I wanted to do this for. And we're going to have a little countdown every month and say, all right, are you going to CoCo Fest? What's happening with the CoCo Fest this month? And what can we do to keep the word out and what's happening, and
more people the better.
Yeah, definitely. And more people at dinner, and more people for the it actually sounds like we will have access to the hall on Saturday evening this time, which we have not had or did not have this year. Sounds like we will have it next year, so maybe we can have another sing-along.
Especially Brother Jeremy's going to.
So, but still, in all seriousness, it will be nice to have more time to socialize with our CoCo friends. And
there was talk about a hackathon.
There has been talk of that. I'm sure people would love to. There are people who would love to do it. I personally would love to see it, and it depends on what actually we're trying to hack up as far as what can be contributed. But it's CoCo Fest is what you make of it, right? You show up, you talk to people who's there, and depends on you to make something of it. Whether it's to bring in your wallet for the for the auction, bringing your ideas for this people to discuss, the projects that you've been working on, projects that you'd like to work on but don't know how to start. It's just that's our focal point. That's that's the challenge for me. Is if you want to call yourself a serious CoCo person, well, let's see you at CoCo Fest. Because where else are you going to go? Right? Don't really have any other options right now. That might change in the future too. But if you're at all on the fence about coming to CoCo Fest, I'd really like to see you there. And you have some sort of concern that you want to discuss, send me an email. I'll talk about it with you as much as you like. Or even better, send us a message to this podcast. Probably have to direct it directly to Neil or I for now because we don't have anything else set up. But contact us, tell us what you're thinking, what your issues are, and
also if there's any events you want us to discuss or get information about, we can help you out.
If you want to run your own CoCo Fest, that'd be great. I'm sure we'll also talk some about the vintage computing festivals and other events that happen throughout the year. But really for us, I think I'm going to speak for Neil and say for us that CoCo Fest is the one. That's where we're going, and that's where we want to see you too.
Some people have big plans after school. You know what Elliot's going to do? Jeff too. Elliot's at work on a book report using Scripted on Radio Shack's Color Computer 3. It hooks up to his TV. And Jeff's at his Radio Shack Color Computer 3 playing the newest football game. But wait, what's Elliot doing playing new Super Pitfall? And Jeff's having a blast with a new math tutor. You never know what you might try with more than 100 programs for fun and learning. Radio Shack's Color Computer 3 comes with everything you see here. Other items each sold separately. Only at Radio Shack.
All right. Well, rather than just ending the podcast with the abrupt end of that CoCo Fest segment, I thought it might be nice to take a few moments for some closing thoughts. I'd like to begin by thanking my co-host, Neil Blanchard. He is taking on responsibility for basically all of the editing for the show. He also has been very supportive, both in putting the show together and just over the years as a fan of Farfall and just as a friend for me and as part of the CoCo community. Also like to take an opportunity to thank Boise Pete, also a great friend and someone who's provided some encouragement for the podcast. Boise also helped us out on the artistic side, both with some of the artwork that we'll be using for promoting the podcast and also with the lovely musical arrangement, Have You Got Your CoCo 3 Yet? And, of course, Boise also provided us a nice little well-wishing recording so that we can include that in between a couple of our segments here. Also providing a well-wishing recording was Mike Rowan, who is another great CoCo person, and we've enjoyed seeing Mike at the CoCo Fest over the years. And we have a number of other friends that I probably can't mention everyone by name, but you know who you are. And we'll probably get you on the podcast at some point, so be ready. Anyway, and of course, I'd like to finish up by thanking the audience for listening this far and giving us a chance to hang out with you and discuss CoCo stuff and bounce some ideas your way, and hopefully you'll return the favor by bouncing ideas back at us. We are hoping to build out this podcast. We're going to be hosting through a commercial site that hosts a lot of podcasts called Libsyn. We have that account already. Well, we've acquired the account. We're still setting it up. And I imagine we'll probably end up with the Facebook page and email addresses and whatever else. Hopefully we'll end up on iTunes at some point. Anyway, that's all still in progress. Like I said, this is episode 0, so I hope you'll forgive us if we're a little rough around the edges or whatever. I'm pretty sure it'll get better over time. That said, be happy to hear your suggestions for what you'd like to see in new episodes. For the time being, you can just send your emails directly to me. I'm available on the CoCo mailing list. Of course, you can send emails to me at Linville, LINVILLE at tuxdriver, TUXDRIVER.com. That's my personal email address, so, please don't overload me. Anyway, hopefully this puts a nice little cap on our episode 0 podcast. And, I just hope we get an opportunity to come back and spend some more time with you, many more times over the next several months, and like I said, maybe years. Okay, so I'll just end with the traditional chant of our people, CoCo forever. Okay? Oh, and have you got your CoCo 3 yet?
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet? Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
Have you got your CoCo 3 yet?
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?